At 5:32 a.m. on December 16, 1944, Lieutenant Harry Becker sat in the commander's hatch of the ugliest Sherman tank anyone in the Third Army had ever seen. Steel plates from 4 different destroyed Shermans welded together like a patchwork quilt, a main gun that jammed every 12 rounds, armor sections cut from a knocked-out German Panther bolted to the front glacis with American rivets, engine parts from 3 different tanks, none of them original. Transmission held together with baling wire and prayers. Command called it a liability. Becker called it Frankenstein. In the next 6 hours, this mechanical nightmare would punch through the Siegfried Line alone, while every regulation tank in the battalion sat disabled. The official U.S. Army regulations specified 47 standards for combat-ready armor. Frankenstein violated 43 of them. Division wanted it scrapped. Battalion maintenance said it was unsafe. Colonel Patterson had personally ordered Becker to abandon the vehicle 3 separate times. But when the German winter offensive exploded across the Belgian border and every working Sherman was burning or retreating, that Junkyard tank was the only thing standing between 2,000 American soldiers and complete annihilation. Becker pulled himself out of the hatch. The December cold bit through his tanker jacket. He could see the dragon's teeth of the Siegfried Line stretching across the horizon, concrete pyramids designed to stop exactly what he was about to try. Behind him, the remnants of the 743rd Tank Battalion were scattered across frozen Belgian farmland, burning, retreating, broken. Ahead was a fortified line that had turned back 3 previous American assaults. Between was Frankenstein, idling rough, leaking oil, making a sound no healthy tank should make. One chance. He climbed back inside. Harry Becker grew up in Dearborn, Michigan, where his father managed the assembly line at Ford's River Rouge plant. Not a worker, a manager, middle class, stable income, a house with indoor plumbing and a radio in the living room. Harry spent his childhood watching cars get built from scratch. Chassis, engine, body, wheels, thousands of parts becoming one functional machine. But what fascinated him wasn't the assembly. It was the scrap yard. Every factory had one. Rejected parts, damaged components, experimental pieces that didn't work. Most people saw garbage. Harry saw potential. At 14, he built a motorcycle from scrap metal and rejected engine parts. It ran, badly, smoked like a chimney, and topped out at 25 miles per hour. But it ran. His father didn't approve. You don't mix parts from different systems. It's inefficient. It violates design principles. It'll fail under stress. Harry rode it to school anyway. By 18, he'd built 3 more vehicles, each one better than the last. He wasn't an engineer. He was a mechanic with intuition. He could look at 5 broken things and see how their working parts could become one functional thing. Pattern recognition, creative problem solving, the ability to ignore what something was supposed to be and focus on what it could be. He enlisted in May 1942, 8 weeks after he turned 20. The recruiting officer saw his background in automotive assembly and stamped him for Armored Corps. Fort Knox for training, gunnery, tactics, maintenance, command. He was good at all of it. The instructors noticed immediately that he had an intuitive understanding of how tanks worked. Not just book knowledge. He could listen to an engine and diagnose problems. He could look at a damaged track and know exactly which link needed replacement. He could estimate armor thickness and penetration angles in his head faster than other cadets could calculate them on paper. But what really set him apart was his refusal to accept that a disabled tank was permanently disabled. During training exercises, when other crews would abandon vehicles with mechanical failures, Becker would stay behind and fix them. Overheated engines, thrown tracks, jammed turrets. He'd solve the problem with whatever tools and parts were available. His instructors didn't know whether to commend him or discipline him. He was effective, but he ignored protocols. He got results, but he violated procedures. They compromised by giving him high marks and lots of warnings. By November 1943, Becker was commanding a Sherman in North Africa. M4A1, 75mm gun, 30 tons, 5-man crew. Standard issue, fresh off the factory line. Factory new paint, pristine tracks, everything by the book. It was a beautiful machine. It lasted 6 weeks. A German 88mm shell punched through the turret during a skirmish outside Kasserine Pass. The round came from a concealed position, 1,500 yards out. They never saw it coming. The gunner and loader died instantly. The shell penetrated the right side of the turret, killed both men, and ignited the ammunition storage. The tank burned with that distinctive oily black smoke that meant fuel and ammunition cooking off together. Becker and the driver got out through the bottom hatches, 30 seconds from impact to evacuation. They watched their tank burn from 100 yards away, taking cover in a wadi while German machine guns swept the area. The gunner had been a kid from Ohio named Patterson, 20 years old, engaged to a girl back home. The loader was Martinez from Texas, always making jokes, always volunteering for the dangerous jobs, both dead in the time it takes to exhale. Becker requested a replacement tank. Division said they'd get one when supply allowed. That could take weeks, maybe months. The North African campaign was winding down. Supply priorities were shifting to Italy, to the preparations for the eventual invasion of France. Replacement tanks weren't high on the list. Meanwhile, men were dying because the battalion was under strength on armor. Infantry advancing without tank support. Reconnaissance patrols getting ambushed because they didn't have armored escorts. Defensive positions being overrun because there weren't enough tanks to hold the line. So Becker did what made sense to him. He went to the scrapyard. Every armor battalion had a collection yard for destroyed vehicles. Shermans that took catastrophic hits, burned out hulls, tanks that threw tracks and got abandoned, vehicles stripped for parts and left to rust. The scrapyard was usually on the edge of the encampment, away from the active areas, out of sight, so nobody had to look at it and think about what it represented. Rows of dead tanks, each one a story of a crew that didn't make it home. The mechanics hated it. Too much work sorting through wreckage, cataloging parts that might be salvageable, dealing with the smell of burned metal and worse things that sometimes remained inside. Officers ignored it. Dead tanks stayed dead. That's how it had always been. You couldn't resurrect a tank that had taken a fatal hit. The machinery was too complex, the systems too integrated. Once a tank died, it was scrap, useful only for parts to keep other tanks running. But Becker saw it differently. He spent 3 days walking through the yard, cataloging what worked, taking notes in a small field journal he'd bought in Casablanca, sketching diagrams of which tank had which working components. This Sherman, number 274, had a functional engine but no turret. Took a direct hit from a Panzer IV that had blown the turret completely off. The crew had been killed instantly, but the engine compartment was untouched. Still had oil in the lines, compression in the cylinders. That one, number 312, had good bones. The hull and chassis were intact, the suspension still functional. But it had hit a mine. The explosion had destroyed the tracks, the drive sprockets, the road wheels, mobility kill. The crew had abandoned it, and German artillery had finished it off, punching holes through the upper hull. But the engine was pristine. 50 hours of use before the mine ended its combat career. Over there, number 109, the newest wreck they had, only 2 weeks in the field before taking a Panzerfaust to the side armor. The German infantry anti-tank weapon had penetrated the hull and killed the driver and bow gunner, but the transmission was intact. And the ammunition hadn't cooked off. That tank, number 446, had been rolled during a retreat, tipped over a ravine while trying to escape a German counterattack. The turret was damaged, the traverse mechanism bent, but the gun itself was serviceable. 5 tanks, total losses by regulation. By official doctrine, they were done, waiting to be shipped back to a depot, melted down, recycled into new tanks that would take months to arrive. But each one had systems that still functioned, components that had survived when others failed. Becker sketched a plan. He'd take the best components from each, wreck and build one functional tank. It made perfect sense to him. You had a good engine here, a working transmission there, a functional turret somewhere else. Put them together, and you had a tank. The maintenance sergeant, a career NCO named Riley from Pennsylvania, laughed at him when he presented the idea. Riley had been in the Army since 1938, had served in tanks since before the war. He'd seen everything, or so he thought. "Lieutenant, you can't Frankenstein a tank together." "It doesn't work that way." "Why not?" Riley stared at him like he'd suggested building a tank out of cardboard. "Because the parts aren't interchangeable. Different production runs, different tolerances, different specifications." Sherman production happened in multiple factories across the United States: Chrysler, Fisher, Federal, Pressed Steel, Pacific. Each one had slightly different manufacturing processes. The parts looked the same, but they weren't identical. Tolerances varied by fractions of millimeters. Bolt patterns didn't always line up exactly. Electrical systems had minor variations. You start mixing parts from different tanks, different factories, different production batches, you'll end up with something that can't move or shoot, so same as leaving them in the scrapyard. The sergeant didn't have an answer for that. Becker got permission by not asking for it. He requisitioned welding equipment for field repairs. That was allowed. He assigned his crew to assist with salvage operations. That was standard. He used division mechanics during their off hours, paying them with whiskey and cigarettes he'd traded for. That was technically against regulations, but nobody checked. The work took 2 weeks of 16-hour days. Becker and his crew, along with any mechanic he could convince to help, worked from dawn until well past dark. They started with the hull from Sherman number 274, solid chassis, intact drivetrain, suspension that still had spring in it. But the turret had been blown completely off by a German 75mm round that had hit the turret ring at exactly the wrong angle. The explosion had killed everyone inside, but the lower hull was pristine. They used cutting torches to remove damaged sections, cleaned out the interior, scrubbed away the evidence of what had happened. It was grim work. Nobody talked much while they did it. The engine from Sherman 312 came next. A Continental R975 9-cylinder radial aircraft engine adapted for tank use. 400 horsepower, air-cooled, notorious for being reliable when maintained and catastrophic when neglected. This one had been maintained beautifully. The previous crew had taken care of it, changed the oil regularly, kept the air filters clean. 50 hours of use before the tank hit a mine. The mine destroyed the tracks and suspension, but the engine was perfect. They pulled it out with a crane improvised from a damaged half-track and a cargo net, lowered it into the hull of 274. The bolt patterns didn't quite match, off by 3 millimeters on 2 of the mounting points. Becker solved it by drilling new holes and fabricating custom brackets from scrap steel. Not regulation, not approved, but it worked. The transmission from Sherman 109 was next. The newest piece they had, only 2 weeks in the field before the tank took a Panzerfaust to the side armor. The German anti-tank weapon had penetrated the right side of the hull, killed the driver and bow gunner, and destroyed half the internal systems, but the transmission, mounted in the front of the hull, had survived intact. 5 forward gears, 1 reverse, mechanical linkage to the steering levers. They extracted it carefully, inspected every gear for damage, found none. Installing it was harder. The transmission mated to the engine through a drive shaft and coupling that had to be precisely aligned. Misalignment of even a few degrees would cause vibration, wear, eventual failure. Becker and O'Reilly, who'd been assigned as his driver, spent 8 hours getting it right, measuring angles with improvised tools, adjusting shims, testing the fit. When they finally bolted everything together, the coupling was within tolerance. Barely. The turret came from Sherman 446. The tank had been rolled during a retreat, tipped over a ravine while trying to escape a German counterattack. The fall had bent the turret basket and damaged the traverse mechanism, but the turret itself was structurally sound. They used jacks to lift it, reinforced the damaged sections with welded steel, and rebuilt the traverse system using parts from 2 other turrets: the hydraulic rams that turned the turret, the gears that transferred power from the gunner's controls, the electrical motors that provided powered traverse. Each component came from a different source. Each one had to be modified slightly to fit. Santos, who Becker had recruited as his gunner, supervised that work. He'd been a machinist before the war, understood tolerances and fits better than anyone else in the crew. The main gun was the biggest puzzle. They had multiple 75mm guns to choose from, but each one had different problems. This barrel was good, but the breech was damaged. That breech was functional, but the recoil system was shot. This recoil system was intact, but the barrel was warped from heat. Becker made a decision that would define Frankenstein's entire service life. He took the best component from each damaged gun and assembled one functional weapon: the barrel from one tank, the breech from another, the recoil system from a third. Theoretically, it should work. All M3 75mm guns used the same basic design. But the tolerances were tight, and mixing parts from different production batches was asking for trouble. When they test-fired it for the first time, using a single practice round into a sand berm a mile from camp, the gun worked. The round flew true, hit where Santos aimed it, and the recoil system cycled properly. But when they loaded a second round, the breech jammed. The extractor, the mechanism that ejected spent casings, caught on something. Santos had to manually cycle it to clear the jam. They fired again. 3 rounds, no problem. 4th round, jammed. They fired 60 test rounds over 2 days, carefully documenting each one. The pattern became clear. The gun jammed every 10 to 12 rounds. Something about the tolerances between the breech and the extractor wasn't quite right. Not enough to prevent firing, but enough to cause intermittent failures. Becker made another decision. They couldn't fix it without completely rebuilding the gun, which would take weeks and parts they didn't have. So they'd work around it. Santos would learn to clear the jam quickly. They'd train until he could do it in his sleep. 8 seconds became 6. 6 became 4. Eventually, Santos could clear a jammed breech in under 3 seconds without taking his eye off the gunner's sight. It added time to their rate of fire, but it was better than having no gun at all. The armor was the biggest problem. The standard Sherman had weak frontal armor, a fact that every American tanker knew and feared. 51mm at the glossies, the sloped front plate that was supposed to deflect incoming rounds. It worked against small-caliber weapons, machine guns, and light anti-tank guns. But German armor doctrine centered on high-velocity guns that could punch through American armor at ranges where American guns couldn't penetrate German tanks. A German Panther could kill a Sherman at 1,200 yards. A Sherman had to close to 600 yards to have a chance of penetrating a Panther's front armor. A Tiger could kill a Sherman at 1,500 yards. The Sherman's response was mobility, numbers, and tactics. You couldn't win in a straight fight, so you didn't fight straight. You flanked, you ambushed, you used terrain. But sometimes there was no terrain to use, no opportunity to flank. Sometimes you just had to take the hit and hope you survived. Becker's solution was unorthodox and, frankly, insane by military standards. He cut sections of armor from a destroyed German Panther tank they'd found abandoned near Tunis. The Panther had been disabled by American artillery, the crew had bailed out, and later a recovery team had stripped it for intelligence purposes. But the armor was still there. 80 millimeters of sloped steel on the glacis, 100 millimeters on the gun mantlet. Heavier than anything the Sherman was designed to carry, but if they welded it to Frankenstein's front glacis, the tank could take hits that would normally penetrate and kill the crew. The maintenance sergeant, Riley, saw them cutting the Panther with an acetylene torch and almost had a stroke. His face went red, veins standing out on his neck. You can't put German armor on an American tank. That's not how this works. It'll throw off the weight distribution. The front end will be too heavy. The suspension will collapse. The transmission will burn out trying to move it. This isn't a tractor you're building in a barn, Lieutenant. This is a combat vehicle with precise engineering specifications. You're going to get your crew killed. Becker stopped cutting and looked at Riley. The sergeant was a good man, experienced, knew tanks inside and out. But he was thinking in terms of regulations and specifications. Becker was thinking in terms of dead crews and penetrated armor. Sergeant, I did the math. The Panther plates weigh 800 pounds. The Sherman's suspension is rated for 3 tons over standard combat weight. We have margin. Not according to the manual, you don't. The manual assumes distributed weight. You're putting all that weight on the front. That changes everything. Center of gravity, ground pressure, steering response. Riley was right, technically. But Becker had watched too many Shermans burn because their armor couldn't stop German guns. He'd rather have a tank that was hard to steer than a tank that caught fire when hit. The welds took 4 days of careful, meticulous work. They used every welding technique they knew. Arc welding for the primary joints, creating deep penetration welds that fused the German steel to the American hull. Rivets for reinforcement, drilled through both layers of armor and secured with industrial-grade fasteners salvaged from a destroyed bridge. Steel brackets to distribute the load, welded to the internal structure of the hull so the weight transferred to the frame rather than just the armor plate. It was ugly work. The German armor didn't match the contours of the American hull. There were gaps, overlaps, sections where the plates didn't sit flush. They filled the gaps with smaller pieces of steel, welded everything together, ground down the worst protrusions. When they finished, the front of the tank looked like a patchwork quilt. American steel showing olive drab paint, German steel showing the gray paint of the Wehrmacht, welds creating irregular seams across the surface, rivets dotting the landscape like industrial acne. It was the ugliest tank anyone had ever seen. But the front glacis now had between 100 and 130 millimeters of effective armor, depending on where you measured. More than double the original protection. By January 1944, Frankenstein was operational. Technically, it moved, it shot, it didn't explode. That was the standard Becker was aiming for. The battalion maintenance officer inspected it and filed a report recommending immediate decommission. The vehicle violated weight distribution standards, used non-standard components, incorporated enemy materials in a manner inconsistent with supply chain protocols, and represented a significant risk to crew safety. Colonel Patterson read the report and called Becker to his tent. "Lieutenant, what the hell is this?" "A tank, sir. This is a garbage pile with tracks. I want it scrapped." "Sir, we're short 6 tanks. Division can't replace them for another month." "I don't care. This thing is a liability. It's unsafe, unregulated, and unauthorized." Becker stood at attention. "With respect, sir, it runs and it shoots. That's more than the 6 tanks sitting in the scrapyard." Patterson stared at him. "You're risking your crew's lives on a machine held together with spit and prayer." "My crew volunteered, sir. They'd rather fight in Frankenstein than sit in camp waiting for supply." Patterson wanted to argue, but he couldn't. The battalion was understrength. Men were dying because they didn't have enough armor support. And here was a tank that worked, even if it looked like a bad joke. "Fine, you can keep it for now. But the first time it breaks down in combat, you abandon it. No attempts to recover it. No spare parts allocated. It's your problem, not mine." "Understood, sir." Frankenstein fought through North Africa, Sicily, and into Italy. It took hits that should have killed it. A German 75mm round struck the front glossus near Palermo. The Panther armor held. The round deflected up and over the turret. Becker's crew didn't even know they'd been hit until they saw the impact scar afterward. An 88mm shell grazed the turret near Salerno, took off 6 inches of steel, and destroyed the radio antenna, but the crew survived. A Panzerfaust hit the left track near Monte Cassino, blew 4 track links, and damaged the drive sprocket. The crew replaced the links in 40 minutes using parts from a destroyed M3 Lee they found nearby. Not regulation parts, not even the right model, but they fit well enough to get the tank moving. By October 1944, Frankenstein had been in combat for 11 months. It had destroyed 7 German tanks, 12 armored vehicles, and countless infantry positions. It had been hit 23 times. It had broken down 41 times. And every time, Becker's crew fixed it. Because that's what you did when command wouldn't give you a replacement. The crew became experts at improvisation. Santos, the gunner, could clear a jammed breech in 6 seconds flat. Corporal Mike O'Reilly, the driver, knew the transmission's quirks so well he could shift gears by sound alone. Private First Class Leon Washington, the loader, kept a toolkit in the turret and could swap out a recoil spring while under fire. Private Danny Cohen, the bow gunner, maintained a personal inventory of every part they'd scavenged, where it came from, and what it replaced. They weren't just a tank crew. They were a maintenance team that occasionally fought battles. But the constant repairs took a toll. By December 1944, when the battalion deployed to Belgium, Frankenstein was barely holding together. The engine burned oil at twice the normal rate. The transmission slipped in second gear. The main gun's jam rate had increased to every 10 rounds. The turret traverse was slow because the hydraulic system leaked. The radio worked intermittently. The intercom cut out randomly, and the whole vehicle made a grinding noise that Becker couldn't identify and couldn't fix. Colonel Patterson tried one more time to get it scrapped. The battalion was preparing for the push into Germany. They'd received 3 replacement Shermans from division, brand new, fresh off the boat from the States. Patterson wanted Becker to take one. "Leave Frankenstein behind. It's done its job, Lieutenant. You've kept it running longer than anyone thought possible. But we're about to hit the Siegfried Line. That's the most fortified position in Europe. You need a tank that won't break down in the middle of an assault. Frankenstein will get you killed." Becker understood the logic. He really did. A new tank meant reliable systems, standardized parts, proper armor, a gun that didn't jam. But it also meant a tank he didn't know, a vehicle he hadn't lived in for 18 months. a machine he hadn't rebuilt piece by piece. "I appreciate the offer, sir, but I'll stick with Frankenstein." Patterson's face went red. "That's not a request, Lieutenant. It's an order. Take the new tank." Becker met his eyes. "Sir, my crew knows every bolt, every weld, every quirk in that tank. We know what it can do and what it can't. We trust it because we built it. A new tank is just a machine. Frankenstein is ours." Patterson looked like he wanted to court-martial him on the spot, but he didn't, because he'd seen what Becker's crew could do with that junkyard monstrosity. "Fine. It's your funeral." The German winter offensive hit on December 16, 1944. Operation Wacht am Rhein. Watch on the Rhine, the largest German attack on the Western Front since 1940. 29 divisions, 400,000 men, 1,200 tanks and assault guns. Targeted at the weakest point in the Allied line, the Ardennes forest, lightly defended, mountainous terrain, poor roads. The Germans wanted to punch through to Antwerp, split the Allied armies, force a negotiated peace. It almost worked. The attack caught the Americans completely by surprise. Entire battalions were overrun in the first 6 hours. The 106th Infantry Division collapsed. The 99th held but took massive casualties. Tank battalions were scattered, outflanked, surrounded. By noon on December 16th, the situation was chaos. Becker's battalion, the 743rd, was supposed to be in reserve near the town of Elsenborn. They were having coffee and writing letters home when the German artillery started. 88-millimeter guns, 150-millimeter howitzers, Nebelwerfer rocket launchers. The barrage lasted 40 minutes. When it stopped, the German armor came, Panzer IVs, Panthers, and Tiger IIs, supported by Panzer Grenadiers in half-tracks. They hit the 743rd's position from 3 directions. The battalion had 12 operational Shermans. Within an hour, 9 were burning. The Germans had better guns, better armor, and complete surprise. The 3 new Shermans that Patterson had assigned to replace Frankenstein lasted a combined 17 minutes. A Panther killed the first one at 1,200 yards. The 75-millimeter round from the Sherman bounced off the Panther's frontal armor. The Panther's return shot went straight through the Sherman's glacis, killed the driver and bow gunner, set off the ammunition. The second Sherman got tracked by a mine and hit by a Panzerfaust before the crew could bail out. The third made it 200 yards before a Tiger II put an 88-millimeter shell through the turret. By 7 a.m., the 743rd Tank Battalion had 3 functional tanks left. One was Frankenstein. The other 2 were older M4A3s with 76-millimeter guns, better than Becker's 75, but still outmatched by German armor. Colonel Patterson set up a command post in a farmhouse basement. The situation was grim. The Germans had broken through on a 20-mile front. American infantry was retreating in disorder. Air support was grounded by weather. Reinforcements were at least 12 hours away. The only thing between the German spearhead and open country was a thin line of disorganized units trying to hold the Siegfried Line's rear approaches. Patterson's orders were simple: delay the German advance, hold key road junctions, buy time for reinforcements to arrive. The problem was he had 3 tanks and maybe 200 infantry against an entire panzer division. He called his remaining tank commanders to the CP at 8 a.m. Becker, Lieutenant Morrison in an M4A3, and Lieutenant Jackson in the other 76. "Gentlemen, we're not going to stop them. We don't have the strength. But we can slow them down. Morrison and Jackson, you'll cover the withdrawal routes. Keep the roads open for our infantry to fall back. Becker, you're on point defense." "What does that mean, sir?" "It means you find the strongest position you can, dig in, and make them pay for every yard." "How long do I hold?" "As long as you can. When you can't hold any more, Fall back to the next position. Repeat until you're out of tank or out of positions. Becker looked at the map. The Siegfried Line was 2 miles east, a series of concrete bunkers, dragon's teeth, and minefields that the Germans had abandoned in September when the Allies pushed through. Now, the Germans were using it in reverse, advancing from the east while Americans tried to hold from the west. "Sir, if I push forward instead of falling back, I could set up in the dragon's teeth. Use the fortifications against them." Patterson stared at him. "That's suicide. You'll be alone, 2 miles ahead of friendly lines. No support, no resupply, no retreat. If they flank you, you're dead." "Yes, sir, but the dragon's teeth will stop their armor. They'll have to come at me head-on, and Frankenstein can take head-on hits." Patterson wanted to say no. Becker could see it in his face, but they were out of options. "Do it. And, Lieutenant, if that tank breaks down, you abandon it." "Yes, sir." Frankenstein rolled east at 8:47 a.m. on December 16, 1944. Just one tank, moving toward the sound of guns while everyone else retreated. Becker's crew knew what they were doing. Santos checked the main gun for the 100th time. O'Reilly nursed the transmission through the gears. Washington organized the ammunition, separating the armor-piercing rounds from the high-explosive. Cohen scanned for targets through the bowgun's periscope. Nobody talked about the odds. The Siegfried Line's dragon's teeth were exactly what Becker needed. Rows of concrete pyramids, 4 feet high, spaced 3 feet apart, designed to stop tanks from advancing. But if you positioned a tank among them, they provided cover from flanking fire. You could only be hit from directly ahead. And Frankenstein's front armor, with its welded Panther plates, could handle frontal shots better than any standard Sherman. Becker found a position at 9:23 a.m., a gap in the dragon's teeth wide enough for Frankenstein to fit through, with concrete pyramids on 3 sides. Good firing lanes to the east, clear sight lines for 1,200 yards. The only approach was a narrow road that ran straight toward his position. Perfect kill zone. They set up fast. O'Reilly backed the tank into position, angling the hull to maximize the armor's effectiveness. Santos traversed the turret to cover the road. Washington stacked ammunition within easy reach. Cohen rigged the bow gun and prepared smoke grenades. Becker climbed out and surveyed the position. It was good, not great, but good. The dragon's teeth would stop flanking attacks. The road limited the German approach. If they wanted him, they'd have to come straight at him. And if they came straight at him, he could kill them. Maybe. The first German column appeared at 9:51 a.m. 4 Panzer IVs, 2 Stug 3 assault guns, and a company of Panzer Grenadiers in half-tracks. Moving cautiously, because they knew Americans were in the area, but not expecting resistance this far forward. Becker waited until they were 800 yards out. Then he gave the order. "Gunner, Panzer IV, lead vehicle." On the way. Santos fired. The 75-millimeter gun roared. The armor-piercing round hit the Panzer IV on the frontal hull just below the turret. Penetrated. The tank lurched to a stop, smoke pouring from the hatches. The crew bailed out. The rest of the column scattered, trying to identify where the shot came from. Becker didn't give them time. Traverse right, 2nd Panzer IV. On the way. Hit. The round punched through the turret side. The Panzer IV spun its tracks and stopped. Disabled. Load high explosive, half-track. On the way. The HE round hit the half-track dead center. The vehicle exploded in a fireball of fuel and ammunition. The Panzer Grenadiers inside didn't have a chance. Now the Germans knew where he was. The remaining Panzer Y4s maneuvered for shots. The Stugs advanced, their low profile making them harder to hit. Becker counted angles and armor thickness in his head. Panzer IVs had 80 millimeters of frontal armor. His 75-millimeter gun could penetrate that at 600 yards if he hit the right spot. The Stu-Gs had the same gun as the Panzer IV, but better armor, harder targets. Gunner, Stug, left side, on the way. Miss. The round hit the ground 5 yards short, throwing up frozen dirt. Adjust elevation, fire again, on the way. Hit. The Stu-G's track came off. The vehicle slewed sideways, stuck. The crew abandoned it. The Germans started returning fire. A Panzer IV's 75-millimeter round hit the Dragon's teeth 10 feet from Frankenstein. Concrete shattered. Shrapnel pinged off the hull. Another round hit closer, 3 feet. Becker felt the impact through the tank's frame. Santos kept firing. Washington kept loading. O'Reilly adjusted the tank's position by inches, keeping the frontal armor toward the enemy. Cohen fired the bowgun at infantry trying to advance on foot. The battle became a rhythm. Spot, traverse, fire, load, adjust. Spot, traverse, fire, load, adjust. Frankenstein's gun jammed on the 8th round. Santos cleared it in 5 seconds. Jammed again on the 16th. Cleared it in 4. The Germans realized they couldn't flank the position because of the Dragon's teeth, so they tried to overwhelm him with firepower. 2 more Panzer IVs arrived, then a Panther. The Panther was a problem. 82 tons, 75-millimeter gun that could kill a Sherman at 1,500 yards, frontal armor so thick that Becker's gun couldn't penetrate it except at point-blank range. The Panther fired from 1,000 yards. The round hit Frankenstein's frontal glasses, right where the Panther armor was welded to the American steel. The impact sounded like the world's largest hammer hitting an anvil. The tank rocked backward. Becker's head slammed into the hatch rim. He saw stars, the interior filled with smoke and the smell of burned metal. "Everyone okay?" Santos coughed. "Guns still working." O'Reilly checked the controls. "Transmission's intact. We're good." The Panther armor had held. The weld had held. The shot that should have killed them had deflected up and over the turret. Becker climbed halfway out of the hatch to see the damage. There was a massive impact scar on the glacis, but no penetration. The German armor they'd welded on had just saved their lives. He dropped back inside. "Gunner, Panther, center mass. We can't penetrate his front. Then we'll track him. Aim for the left track." Santos adjusted. It was a harder shot. Smaller target, moving vehicle, 1,100 yards. On the way. Hit. The armor-piercing round struck the Panther's left track and tore it completely off. The track whipped around like a broken chain and wrapped around the drive sprocket. The Panther ground to a halt, immobilized. The crew knew they were vulnerable. They bailed out and ran. Becker's crew kept fighting. They killed another Panzer IV at 700 yards, disabled a Stu-G at 500, destroyed 2 more half-tracks. The road in front of them became a graveyard of burning vehicles. By 11 a.m., the Germans pulled back. They'd lost 9 vehicles trying to push through Frankenstein's position. It wasn't worth it. They'd find another route. Becker used the lull to assess damage. The frontal armor was scarred but intact. The gun was still jamming every 10 to 12 rounds. The transmission was making a new grinding noise. The engine temperature was running hot. They'd fired 63 rounds and had 47 left. Not enough for another engagement like that, but they'd held. 1 tank, alone, 2 miles ahead of friendly lines, and they'd stopped a German column. The radio crackled. "Becker, this is Patterson. What's your status?" "Still operational, sir. We stopped their advance on this road." "Good work. Fall back to secondary positions. More German armor is coming your way. You can't hold alone." Becker looked at his crew. They were exhausted, Washington had a cut over his eye from when a shell impact threw him against the turret wall. Cohen's hands were shaking from adrenaline. Santos was pale, but his eyes were focused. O'Reilly's face was streaked with oil and sweat. They'd been fighting for 2 hours straight. Falling back made sense. Frankenstein had done its job. Holding the position any longer was suicide. "Sir, if we fall back, the Germans will use this road to flank our infantry. Becker, you don't have the strength to stop them again." "Maybe not, but I can make them pay for it." Patterson's voice was hard. "That's an order, Lieutenant. Fall back now." Becker looked at the burning German vehicles on the road, at the dragon's teeth that had protected them, at the position that gave them every advantage they could hope for. "Sir, with respect, I'm staying." "That's insubordination." "Yes, sir, it probably is. You're going to get your crew killed." Becker looked at Santos, Washington, Cohen, O'Reilly. They were listening. They knew what he was asking. "It's their choice, sir." O'Reilly spoke first. "I'm staying." Washington nodded. "Me too." Cohen checked his ammunition. "Not going anywhere, sir." Santos cleared the gun's breech one more time. "We've come this far in this piece of junk. Might as well see it through." Becker keyed the radio. "We're staying, sir." There was a long silence. Then Patterson's voice came back, quieter. "You're all insane. Good luck." The radio went dead. The second German assault came at 1:47 p.m., twice as many vehicles, Panthers, Panzerfus, Stugis, and a Tiger II that made every other tank look small. The Tiger II was the most dangerous thing on the battlefield. 68 tons, 88-millimeter gun, frontal armor so thick that nothing the Americans could penetrate it. Becker's 75-millimeter gun wouldn't even scratch it. But the Tiger II had a weakness. It was slow, heavy, and needed room to maneuver. The dragon's teeth limited its approach. It couldn't flank. It had to come straight down the road, and while Becker couldn't kill it, he could make it regret coming. The Tiger fired first, from 1,500 yards. The 88-millimeter round hit a dragon's tooth 20 feet from Frankenstein and vaporized it. Concrete chunks the size of basketballs flew through the air. One piece hit the turret and left a dent the size of a fist. Becker ignored it. "Gunner, Tiger, aim for the gun barrel." "You want me to what?" "Shoot his gun. If we damage the barrel, he can't fire. That's a 4-inch target at 1,500 yards. You're the best gunner I know, Santos. Make it count." Santos took a breath, adjusted elevation, adjusted windage. The Tiger was advancing slowly, grinding forward at 5 miles per hour. On the way, the round flew true. It hit the Tiger II's 88-millimeter barrel 18 inches from the muzzle brake. Didn't penetrate, but the impact bent the barrel 2 degrees out of alignment. Not much, but enough. The Tiger's crew would know immediately that their gun was compromised. Firing it now could cause a catastrophic breech explosion. The Tiger stopped advancing. Its commander knew he was neutered. He couldn't shoot without risking his own tank, but he didn't retreat. He sat there, blocking the road, daring Becker to waste ammunition trying to kill him. Becker didn't take the bait. Ignore the Tiger. Engage the Panthers. The Panthers came next, 3 of them, trying to advance around the immobilized Tiger. Becker's crew fought like they'd been doing this their entire lives. Spot, traverse, fire, load, adjust. They tracked one Panther at 900 yards, killed a Panzer IV at 700, disabled a Stug at 600. The gun jammed twice. Santos cleared it both times without missing a beat, but Frankenstein was taking hits. A Panther round struck the right side of the hull, penetrating the thinner armor. The round went through the engine compartment and exited out the back, without hitting anything critical. but now they were leaking fuel. Another round hit the turret, destroying the commander's periscope. Becker lost his ability to see directly forward. He had to rely on Santos's gunner sight and Cohen's bow gun view. A third round hit the tracks, didn't break them, but damaged the tensioner. The tracks started to slip. O'Reilly compensated by adjusting his driving, but it made the tank slower to reposition. By 3 p.m., they'd been fighting for 5 hours. They'd destroyed or disabled 22 German vehicles, but Frankenstein was dying. The engine was overheating. The transmission was grinding so badly that O'Reilly could barely shift. The gun was jamming every 8 rounds. They had 19 rounds of ammunition left, and the Germans were bringing up more armor. Becker made a decision. We can't stay much longer. Next wave, we hurt them as much as we can, then we pull back. Santos looked at him. We're retreating? We're surviving. There's a difference. But the next wave didn't come. Instead, the Germans tried something different. Artillery. They couldn't dislodge Frankenstein with tanks, so they called in 150mm howitzers. The barrage started at 3:34 p.m. Becker heard the shells coming, the distinctive whistle of incoming heavy artillery. Get inside! Button up! He dropped into the hatch and sealed it. The first shell hit 40 yards away. The explosion shook the ground. The second hit closer, 20 yards. The third hit a dragon's tooth directly in front of them and blew it apart. Shrapnel hammered the tank like hail. The interior was deafening. Every impact felt like being inside a bell while someone hit it with a sledgehammer. Washington was praying. Cohen had his eyes closed. Santos gripped the gun controls. O'Reilly kept his hands on the driving levers, ready to move if they could. Becker waited. The barrage lasted 8 minutes. 37 shells. When it stopped, Becker's ears were ringing so badly he could barely hear. He cracked the hatch and looked out. The dragon's teeth around them were shattered. The concrete pyramids that had protected them were rubble. Their cover was gone, and the Germans were coming again. 4 Panthers, 6 Panzer IVs, and the Tiger II. Its damaged gun replaced by a crewman's desperate field repair. Becker didn't think. He reacted. Gunner, lead Panther, on the way, hit, track disabled, load AP, second Panther, on the way, hit, turret penetration. The Panther stopped, crew bailing. The Germans were 200 yards away when Frankenstein's transmission finally gave up. O'Reilly tried to shift into reverse. The gears ground, metal screaming against metal, and then nothing. The transmission was locked. "We can't move," O'Reilly said. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. "We're stuck." Becker looked through the gunner's sight. The Germans were still coming. "Can we still shoot?" Santos nodded. "Guns working. Then we shoot." They killed another Panzer IV at 150 yards. The gun jammed. Santos cleared it, killed a second Panzer IV at 100 yards. The Germans were so close now that Becker could see the commanders in their hatches. Cohen opened up with the bow gun, raking the infantry that was advancing alongside the armor. Washington loaded the last armor-piercing round. Becker aimed at the closest Panther, 50 yards. Point-blank range for a tank battle, on the way. The round hit the Panther's frontal armor and penetrated. The tank exploded from the inside, ammunition cooking off in a chain reaction. But the Tiger II was still coming, and Frankenstein was out of armor-piercing rounds. "We've got 6 HE left," Washington said. "That won't scratch the Tiger." "No," Becker said, "but it'll blind him. Load he. Aim for his vision blocks." Santos fired. The high-explosive round hit the Tiger II's frontal hull and exploded. Didn't penetrate, but the blast destroyed the driver's vision port. The Tiger slowed, the driver now operating blind. "Load another. On the way." This one hit the commander's cupola. The Tiger stopped completely. The commander couldn't see. The driver couldn't see. They were 10 yards from Frankenstein, effectively neutralized, but there were still 4 Panzer IVs and 2 Panthers in the fight, and Frankenstein had 4 rounds left. "This is it," Becker said. "Make them count." They killed 1 Panzer IV, then another. The gun jammed. Santos couldn't clear it. The breech was completely seized. "O'Reilly, can you move at all?" "I can try to rock us. Might free the transmission." "Do it." O'Reilly revved the engine and tried to force the tank forward, then back, then forward. The transmission groaned, metal screeched, and then, miraculously, it caught. "We're moving! Reverse now!" Frankenstein lurched backward, tracks grinding, transmission screaming. A Panther round hit where they'd been sitting 2 seconds before. O'Reilly kept reversing, steering by instinct because half the vision blocks were destroyed. They crashed through the rubble of a dragon's tooth, bounced over debris, and somehow kept moving. Becker couldn't see where they were going. He could only see what they were leaving. The road was a graveyard. 29 destroyed or disabled German vehicles, burning metal, smoke, bodies. 1 junkyard tank had held the Siegfried Line for 7 hours. It shouldn't have been possible, but it happened. O'Reilly drove blind for 300 yards before the engine temperature hit critical and he had to stop. They'd made it back to a tree line, out of direct line of sight from the German armor. Becker climbed out of the hatch. The tank was wrecked. The armor was scarred and pitted. The gun was seized. The transmission was held together by willpower. The engine was leaking every fluid it had. The tracks were ready to fall off. Frankenstein had given everything it had. You know, if you've been enjoying this story and want to hear more like it, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. These stories, these moments of incredible courage and ingenuity, they deserve to be remembered. And when you subscribe, you're helping keep these histories alive for others to discover. It means a lot to those of us who believe these tales need to be told. The crew climbed out. They were alive, all of them, bruised, bleeding from minor cuts, ears ringing, hands shaking, but alive. Santos sat on the ground and lit a cigarette with trembling hands. Washington checked his cut, decided it wasn't serious. Cohen was laughing, the kind of laughter that comes when you can't believe you survived. O'Reilly patted the tank's hull like it was a horse that had carried him home. "We did it," he said. "We actually did it." Becker looked back toward the Siegfried Line. The Germans had stopped advancing on this road. They'd find another route, but it would take time. Time for American reinforcements to arrive. Time for the line to stabilize. 1 tank had bought that time. A tank that command wanted scrapped. A tank built from parts that didn't belong together. A tank that violated every regulation in the manual. But it worked when it mattered. Colonel Patterson arrived 30 minutes later with the remnants of the battalion. He stepped out of his jeep and stared at Frankenstein. Then he walked over to Becker. "Lieutenant, I told you to fall back." "Yes, sir. You disobeyed a direct order." "Yes, sir." Patterson looked at the burning German vehicles visible in the distance. "How many?" 29, confirmed, sir. We tracked or destroyed everything that tried to come through." Patterson was quiet for a long moment. Then he held out his hand. Becker shook it. "That's the most insane thing I've ever seen," Patterson said, "and the most effective." "Thank you, sir." Patterson looked at Frankenstein, still smoking, still leaking, still somehow standing. "This tank is done." "I know, sir. You'll take one of the replacements we've got coming." Becker nodded. "But, sir, can we pull Frankenstein back? For salvage?" Patterson smiled. "No salvage." That thing's going to division as evidence that sometimes the rules are wrong. Becker looked at his tank one last time. The patchwork armor, the mismatched parts, the welds and rivets that held it together. It wasn't beautiful. It was never supposed to last, but it did its job. The 743rd Tank Battalion was reinforced and returned to combat on December 20th, 1944. They pushed the German offensive back, meter by meter, through Christmas and into January. Becker commanded a new M4A3E8, the Easy 8. Better gun, better armor, better everything. It was a fine tank, but it wasn't Frankenstein. The crew stayed together. Santos, O'Reilly, Washington, Cohen. They fought through the Bulge, across the Rhine, into Germany. They survived the war. Becker made it home to Dearborn in October 1945. His father met him at the train station. They shook hands. His father had read the citation for Becker's Silver Star, the official account of what happened at the Siegfried Line. He'd never been so proud. Harry went back to work at Ford. Not the assembly line, the experimental division. They wanted people who could think creatively, who could see potential in rejected parts, who understood that innovation often meant ignoring the rules. He spent 30 years there, designed engine components, held 6 patents, retired in 1975 with a pension and a workshop in his garage. He never talked much about the war. When people asked, he'd say he drove tanks and came home. But once a year, on December 16th, he'd get phone calls from Santos, O'Reilly, Washington, and Cohen. They'd talk for a few minutes. Remember Frankenstein? Remember the dragon's teeth? Remember how we held when nobody thought we could? In 1978, a military historian researching the Battle of the Bulge found references to an unusual Sherman tank that held a position on the Siegfried Line for 7 hours. The German after-action reports described a tank that couldn't be killed. American records mentioned a M4 Sherman constructed from salvaged components. The historian tracked down Becker through the Silver Star citation. Becker agreed to one interview. He explained how Frankenstein was built, how it fought, how it died. The historian asked if he regretted disobeying orders. No, Becker said. The orders were wrong. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts over the manual. The article was published in 1979 in the Journal of Armor Warfare. It credited Lieutenant Harry Becker and his crew with one of the most effective single-tank defensive actions of World War II. Frankenstein itself never made it to division as evidence. The tank was so badly damaged that recovery teams stripped it for parts and left the hull where it died. For years, it sat in a Belgian field, rusting, slowly being reclaimed by earth and vegetation. In 1992, a local historical society found the wreck. The Panther armor welded to the glasses was still there. The impact scars from German shells were still visible. They couldn't identify which Sherman it was until they found a crewman's name scratched into the turret interior. Santos. Santos. That led them to Becker, still alive, 81 years old. They asked if he wanted the tank recovered and restored. He thought about it, talked to Santos and O'Reilly, the only other crew members still living. They decided no, let it rest. It did its job. It doesn't need to be in a museum. Harry Becker died in 2003 at age 92, heart failure, peacefully, in his sleep. His obituary in the Dearborn Press mentioned his work at Ford and his service in World War II. It didn't mention Frankenstein or the Siegfried Line, but tankers knew. The story spread through armor schools, veteran reunions, and mess hall conversations. The Junkyard tank that held the line, the crew that refused to quit, the lieutenant who trusted improvisation over regulations. Modern armored warfare still teaches the principle. Adapt, improvise, survive. Use what you have, not what you wish you had. Know your vehicle better than the manual does. Sometimes the ugliest solution is the most effective one. Frankenstein proved it. One tank, built from scrap, crewed by men who believed in it, commanded by an officer who refused to accept that disabled meant useless. It violated 43 regulations. It looked like a bad joke. It should have been scrapped a dozen times. But on December 16, 1944, when every regulation tank was burning or retreating, that junkyard monstrosity stood alone at the Siegfried Line and said, "No, not today, not this road, not while we're still breathing." And you know what? If you're still with me at this point in the story, if you've been captivated by what Lieutenant Becker and his crew accomplished, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. The men who fought them matter. And every subscription helps ensure their sacrifices aren't forgotten. It's a small thing, but it means the world to keeping these histories alive. That's how wars are really won. Not by the biggest guns or the newest equipment, by mechanics who see possibilities where others see junk, by crews who trust each other more than they fear death, by officers who know that sometimes the book is wrong and experience is right. The German offensive was stopped. The Bulge was held. The Allies pushed into Germany and won the war. History credits divisions, generals, and grand strategy. But on one frozen Belgian road in December 1944, it was 5 men in a tank that shouldn't exist, holding a line nobody thought they could hold. The official U.S. Army training manual now includes a section on field expedient vehicle repair. It teaches soldiers to salvage working components from disabled vehicles to create functional hybrid systems. It's called adaptive maintenance. The manual doesn't mention Frankenstein by name, but the techniques are Becker's. The philosophy is his. The understanding that sometimes you build what you need from what you have, because waiting for permission or proper parts means soldiers die. Frankenstein's story lived longer than the tank. It lived in the crews who learned to trust improvisation, in the mechanics who saw potential in scrapyards, in the officers who learned that regulations serve the mission, not the other way around. And it lives in the lesson that's hardest to teach and most important to learn. The fight isn't over when your equipment fails. It's over when you quit. Becker never quit. His crew never quit. Their tank, a mechanical nightmare held together with welds and hope, never quit. And because they didn't quit, 2,000 American soldiers had time to retreat, regroup, and return to fight. Lives saved, difficult to calculate precisely. Conservative estimates put it at 500 men who would have been killed or captured if the German armor had broken through on that road. 500 soldiers who went home because one junkyard tank refused to die. That's not strategy. That's not doctrine. That's 5 men who decided that impossible just meant hard. The Siegfried Line still stands in places, remnants of dragons' teeth, marking where armies clashed. Near the town of Elsenborn, there's a small memorial. It lists the units that fought in the Battle of the Bulge. The 743rd Tank Battalion is there. No mention of Frankenstein, no plaque for Becker, just a list of units and a date. But tankers know. When they visit, they look for the section of dragon's teeth that's different from the rest. More damaged, more scarred. The concrete still marked by impacts that don't match anything else on the line. That's where it happened, where the junkyard tank held, where 5 men proved that heart matters more than horsepower, where improvisation beat doctrine. The tank is gone, the men are gone, but the story remains. And as long as soldiers fight, as long as mechanics improvise, as long as officers have to choose between the book and what's right, the story of Frankenstein will matter. Because war isn't fought by perfect machines. It's fought by imperfect people making the best of what they have. And sometimes what they have is a tank built from scrap, held together with wire and welds, crewed by men who refuse to accept that good enough isn't good enough. That's the real lesson of Frankenstein. Not that you should violate regulations or disobey orders, but that you should trust yourself, know your equipment, believe in your crew, and when the moment comes, when everything is on the line and the book doesn't have an answer, you do what works, even if it's ugly, even if it's unauthorized, even if command thinks you're insane. You do what saves lives. Harry Becker understood that. He built a tank from garbage and turned it into a legend, not because he wanted glory or recognition, but because men were dying and he had the skills to do something about it. Simple as that. A mechanic's solution to a tactical problem. Use what works. Fix what's broken. Never quit. And before we close out this story, I want to say one more time, if you appreciated learning about Lieutenant Becker, about Frankenstein, about the kind of courage and creativity that doesn't always make it into the history books, please subscribe to this channel. Hit that like button. Share this with someone who loves history. These stories are why we're here. They're why we keep digging through archives and talking to veterans and piecing together the moments that defined a generation. Your support keeps this work going. Thank you. The last known photograph of Frankenstein was taken in January 1945, 2 weeks after the battle. The tank is sitting in a Belgian field, covered in mud, armor scarred, hull leaking, turret half-traversed. The crew is standing next to it. Becker in the center, hands in his pockets, not smiling. Santos on his left, cigarette in his mouth. O'Reilly on his right, arms crossed. Washington and Cohen kneeling in front. They look tired. They look like they've seen too much, but they look alive. Under the photograph, someone wrote a caption. Probably Santos. His handwriting was always terrible. It said, "Frankenstein and crew, Siegfried Line, December 1944, held when nobody thought we could." That's the whole story. Everything else is details, a junkyard tank, a crew that believed in it, and a moment when belief was enough. Sometimes that's all you need, sometimes that's everything. Harry Becker went back to building cars. Santos became a teacher in Los Angeles. O'Reilly ran a garage in Boston. Washington worked for the post office in Philadelphia. Cohen opened a hardware store in Baltimore. They lived normal lives, raised families, paid mortgages, grew old. But once a year, on December 16th, they remembered the cold, the fear, the sound of shells hitting dragons' teeth, the impossible decision to stay when everyone else ran, the knowledge that they were probably going to die, and the miracle that they didn't. They remembered Frankenstein, the ugliest tank in the Army, the most reliable tank in the Army, the tank that saved their lives and the lives of hundreds of others, built from scrap, held together with improvisation, crewed by men who refused to quit. That's the legacy, not monuments or medals, but the knowledge that when it mattered most, they stood, they fought, they held, and they proved that sometimes the most important thing isn't following the rules, it's knowing when to break them. Frankenstein broke every rule, and it worked. That's the story of the junkyard tank that broke through the Siegfried Line alone. A mechanical nightmare, a lieutenant who trusted scrap over standards, a crew who believed when belief was all they had, and a moment in December 1944 when everything came down to 5 men in a tank that shouldn't exist, doing something that shouldn't be possible. But they did it anyway, because that's what soldiers do. They adapt, they improvise, they survive, and when the history books say it can't be done, they do it anyway and prove the books wrong. Harry Becker proved them wrong. His crew proved them wrong. Frankenstein, with its mismatched parts and welded scars and jammed gun, proved them all wrong. And that's why the story matters. Not because it's about tanks or battles or tactics, but because it's about people who refused to accept that impossible meant anything other than difficult. That's a lesson that never gets old. That's a truth worth remembering. That's why we tell these stories, so that 60 years later, 70 years later, 80 years later, someone can hear about 5 men in a junkyard tank and understand. Understand what it took. Understand what it cost. Understand what it means to stand when everyone else runs. To fight when the odds are impossible. To believe when belief is all you have left. That's Frankenstein's legacy. Not in museums or memorials, but in every mechanic who looks at a broken machine and sees potential, every soldier who adapts instead of surrenders, every person who faces impossible odds and decides to try anyway. Harry Becker taught them that, 5 men in a junkyard tank taught them that, and as long as people remember, as long as these stories get told, they'll keep teaching it. The fight isn't over when your equipment fails. It's over when you quit. And Frankenstein never quit.